Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas, and joining us to kick off this week's program, by the way, would be remiss if I didn't remind you that you can learn more about us at virginiainstitute.org, and we have a YouTube channel with previous editions of this program by guest name, so you look it up and look up the guests you're interested in finding, or just go chronologically through the history of this program, at least recently, at our YouTube channel under Freedom and Prosperity Radio. One of our very favorite people, he is Culpeper County Sheriff Scott Jenkins, kicks us off this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Mayor, listen to me promoting you. Sheriff Jenkins, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you.
Now, I know there was a controversial bill that really had a lot of people puzzled. It was more of these social justice bills, and I'm not really sure the premise that they wrote it under. It sounds like they were misunderstanding the old broken windows premise of law enforcement and policing, where you couldn't be pulled over for having malfunctioning equipment on your car, and I guess under the heading, even a broken clock is right twice a day. Governor Northam refused to sign that bill into law last week. But, I mean, have we gotten to this point where, public safety takes a back seat to being woke, Sheriff?
I would say it would be funny if it wasn't so sad to see what those useful idiots of the governors are doing down there writing the bills. As I've said before, it reminds me of Levine's bill on the so-called assault weapons, and the man literally could not tell you one end of an assault weapon or firearm, for that matter, from the other. It was laughable to watch them try to have an open discussion at committee level, and I imagine, thankfully, I didn't have to see it or be part of it to be sickened by it. But this is just one of the other idiotic things they've done in this just crazy liberal push they have on police and in general with these bills. They're trying to attack us from all directions. And to, the good example is you can't, as an officer, stop a car that has its headlights off at night.
That would be
where
crazy.
are we going? Where are we going when we go down that road? That's just insane.
Well, and to me, actually having restrictions like a police officer has to show due cause to pull over a vehicle actually protects the minority communities that might say, "Hey, why'd you pull me over?" And you have to be able to prove that there is some sort of observable malfunction. It can't just be I didn't like the way you looked, or in this neighborhood an Impala is probable cause. I don't know. Scott. So I'm glad the governor didn't sign it into law, but that doesn't mean they're not going to come back at this in some way, shape, or form, and again try to hamstring law enforcement with things that as hard as a job as it is for a law enforcement officer to understand all the laws, to understand all the ramifications, and then generally have to go into a scenario where more times than not, bad stuff is going on, whether a burglary has just taken place, an assault has just taken place, or in some cases is still going on.
Yes. And, the unique thing I've noticed this year among any other years is, the people who are proposing these bills months ago, when we saw the meetings that they were having with, all types of groups. I know that, for example, the Black Caucus had met and put some proposed bills that they wanted to address things such as police use of tear gas, chokeholds, a lot of other things that they wanted to talk about, so-called police reform. And, those of us who've been in law enforcement, and really I don't think you have to be in law enforcement to understand the idiocy of wanting to take away less lethal munitions and other things that officers use to not have to use a higher level of force like tear gas. I mean, whether it's OC spray that we carry on our belts or tear gas that you use for a large number of people. What world are you living in that you would think it would be a good thing to take away those things from police and leave them with no other choice than to escalate, because we don't
True.
go down in levels of force to meet what is brought against us. I mean, the people who are using open hands, whether it be sticks and rocks and bottles and other things. I mean, officers, to disperse a crowd or to overcome threats such as that, they're not going to just stay open-handed and try to address that. And that's the kind of things they, with a serious face, actually came to the table trying to propose. And that should tell you something about this group we have in Richmond and where their mind is when it comes to these issues with police. They're just playing to their base and trying to appease the ones who are screaming the loudest. And it is definitely the minority. The majority understands that, we need law enforcement. Law enforcement is not a punching bag, and they're not targets for abuse and assault and killings. And we see that all over the country where we've got these liberal strongholds doing that. And here we have Richmond, following that lead that they see around the country. And I think it's going to play out very badly for them in the coming days of elections this year and next year.
Well, let me ask you this, and I said this, and I didn't mean to say it glibly or just for the impact of it, but as I go through the reports of, for example, one of the things they wanted to reform is the use of no-knock warrants in Virginia. Had the police officers in St. Louis used a no-knock warrant, not St. Louis, Louisville, Breonna Taylor would still be alive because they were given permission to use a no-knock warrant but chose not to, alerting her boyfriend to their presence and giving him an opportunity to pull out a firearm and start to escalate, whereas the no-knock warrant would have actually given them the opportunity to secure the scene without the escalation. And there is, and the reason I bring it up, though, is to show that even something like a no-knock warrant has efficacy.
They do. They have a designated purpose, the public doesn't understand. We use a threat matrix when we look at serving high-risk warrants. And, if it meets a certain level of threat, could be the occupants or the target having previous assault on officers or possession of firearms and other things they've used in past crimes, that all clicks the matrix numbers up to where it would maybe rise to the level of a no-knock. But I think a lot of people miss the point, and that is that, when you look at, I won't comment on that agency. I don't know the details of exactly, every step that they followed when they went into that service. Certainly, we have changed how we do policing through the years, even the high-risk warrants for drugs. When it's narcotics-related, for example, here at our agency, we follow the National Tactical Officers Association recommendations and best practices. We're a nationally accredited agency. So when it comes to narcotics warrants, for example, the old days of decades ago, you may have saw where, a lot of TAC teams or drug units were making these entries into these homes to do nothing other than hope to retrieve a large quantity of narcotics before they're flushed or destroyed. And that's the reason they're trying to get in there, is to further their case. It's a little different mindset now, and most people don't see that because they watch too much TV and movies and look at it differently, and so do our lawmakers, and they don't understand. If you build the case properly and have the buys and so forth of your informant things documented where the warrants are already in hand, you're not relying on just the luck of the draw when you crash in that door and hope to get some large stash of narcotics before they're destroyed. It does risk lives when you're crashing indoors in the early morning hours and people are resting and think that it's an intruder. Bad things can happen, like in Breonna Taylor, and sadly, she lost her life. It's a horrible thing. None of us would want that to happen to anyone, regardless of whether they're committing crimes or not. But you can't blame the officer who's now shot at or hit with a round for returning fire. I mean, granted, anyone's going to do that, and it's just a horrible situation that it's unfortunate on both sides. You'll find a lot of agencies now, most agencies are calling people out once they, maybe they pound on the door, make that loud announcement, or maybe breach the door even and get it open, but they're not entering and swarming through the rooms just in search of narcotics. There's usually going to be other factors involved and people and so forth targets are looking for before they're going to do those things. We do enough things that are high risk enough with hostage barricades raids and other things that we have to go in and do entries rather than risk officers' lives and citizens over, a few bags of narcotics. And I wish that, the intelligent minds of people that know these things of how we do things in policing nowadays versus long ago would have sat down at the table with our Democratic and Republican members of the legislature and make them aware of that. Because I can tell you from discussions months ago that I listened to, it was insanity. They clearly didn't know anything they were talking about, and they were using these talking points that they hear from around the country. And much like in Louisville and other places, they use those targeted instances to say, look, this was done wrong, when in fact, that doesn't speak for all of law enforcement.
Well, and it also still inoculates the lawmaker from the laws that they've made. And in no case was anyone in Louisville accused of breaking the law. They were enforcing a law as it was written, and the legislators are really the ones who put those laws on the book, not the law enforcement officers. They're just there enforcing what the legislature of the people put together.
That's exactly right. It's unfortunate. All of the stuff we've watched for months across the country in these cities that literally are burning and dealing with all the unrest, it would be good if those powers that be would sit down with cooler heads, with people who truly know the jobs, not some mayor that's never has worked a day in law enforcement trying to call the shots over a police chief, or should I say a police chief they've removed and now replaced and so forth at a whim. These city council members and others, if they would just sit down and really be educated from the professionals on how they truly do their jobs and why they have to do certain things, just like the crowd control techniques and other things. Before you go passing bills, disarming police, causing a lot of chaos in the results that you aren't planning for, such as, now we see in some of these cities saying they wish they hadn't defunded or held the police back and so forth and caused some of the problems that they've seen. Sit down, talk about the issues, and really inform yourself on what the real goal should be. I mean, yes, we have police that should be removed from the profession. Too long now we've had the ability for bad officers to be able to keep their job. And you can point to police unions, you can point to legislatures and others who've not passed certain laws, but those are things we can really make change in for the good of everybody to, have the bad officers removed once and for all and not allow them to job hop from city to city or state to state, because they've been able to do that throughout my 30-year career.
Scott Jenkins is on with us, Culpeper County Sheriff, and I want to pivot to another issue. You were in what, for many years, we've been talking about these 287 agreements with the Immigration and Customs authorities, and in court, as folks were saying, that now take us through this. It was dismissed by the Virginia Supreme Court. I presume that may be appealed. I don't know the status of it. But you had the NAACP and the ACLU, if I understand correctly, fighting against you. How was it resolved, and what did the Supreme Court say about the case?
Well, there was yes on the ACLU. There was some local citizens, Mike McClary and some others who were all part of the mix of getting the suit filed and going, and then it was appealed up to the Virginia Supreme Court. And last week we got the decision from them that they were dismissing it due to lack of standing from the complainant. And in a nutshell, they were claiming that that I, as a sheriff, didn't have the authority to enter into agreements with federal law enforcement such as ICE to conduct the 287G program, which is nothing more than having people who are already committed to our jail identified through a screening process where we then contact ICE, and if they are here illegally and committing crimes, then ICE will lodge a detainer and come and pick the person up within 48 hours and remove them from our facility. It's just simple cooperation with the federal law enforcement agency, the way we would with DEA, FBI, and others on task forces and other things, to say that a local sheriff should not, could not do that is a bit ridiculous.
Right.
We do it every day. That's how we do our jobs. Without the force multiplier of local law enforcement for federal agencies, they couldn't possibly be effective. There's just simply not enough of them to do the jobs that they have to do. It's not just ICE; it's all of the federal agencies, and we work with federal agencies, others much more than we do ICE. We have actually a small number of people that it actually impacts as far as removals.
So, well, that's good news, though. Then you can still enforce, because we've had instances here in several cases where people, and it's interesting, you can hear in between the lines when the news report says, and they'll be sent back to Peru after their sentence is done. I'm like, really? So does that mean they're a citizen? Does that mean you almost, it's almost notable by the absence of the detail over some of these illegal immigrants as they commit crimes in our area that we don't want to report that the illegal immigrant was captured and convicted for dealing methamphetamine, and does that make it better or worse, Scott? I don't understand in my business sometimes when we leave these phrases out.
No, it's the overarching ideal, and the point is that if you're here already illegally in this country, and it is illegal, it is not a civil issue, it is criminal code violation in federal code. You're here illegally, and we have millions. And I've said before, I don't expect us to try to deport people who are not breaking any laws and are simply in the U.S. illegally. That's to the federal government to decide how they want to make them citizens, give them a pathway, and so on. But if you're here illegally and you choose to not be of good behavior and violate our laws and actually get committed to jail, you has to rise to a certain level to go to jail. And if it's not that hard, I think you and I can both agree. We've lived a life where we've not felt the need to violate laws and end up in a jail cell. But if you do, yes, you should expect this country, who's a nation of laws, to hold you accountable and remove you and to send you back to where you came from. And any citizen who's not understanding the logic in that and agreeing that we should cooperate and that ICE should have, these people screaming to defund ICE. That is part of a liberal agenda that it's utter insanity if you can't have the conversation of logic that yes, a nation has to have borders and you have to have laws enforced, especially when, like in our community, they come here illegally and then end up committing everything up to and including homicide. And we've had people die here at the hands of illegal aliens, and they were people who were already deported once or more than once before and should not have been here. Look at the sergeant just killed about a week ago in Houston at the hands of an illegal alien there who had already been removed and should have been out of the country at the time. And that man with a 41-year career in law enforcement is now dead, and because of the fact that we have someone here that shouldn't be here in the first place.
Right. And their community less safe. With Election Day Tuesday, Scott, give us a feel for security. I keep hearing stories about voter intimidation and efforts being undertaken. The Attorney General's office saying we're ordering sheriff's departments to, enforce the law. Have you seen anything or heard anything regarding voter intimidation? And what is the sheriff's office, just for example, yours, and if you've talked to others across the Commonwealth, gearing up for on Election Day?
Every county is, working closely with our electoral boards and officials to make sure that we're available for anything they need. We do have stepped up numbers as far as our resources available on Election Day and the days to follow. If there's any kind of disruption, we'll deal with it swiftly. And that's as simple as we can make it. Really, we personally and in the counties in our region of Virginia, I don't know of anything that's anticipated to be of any significance. Maybe afterwards there is some talk of some communities, larger areas that may have some unrest and protests and so forth, and that'll be what it is. But as far as Election Day, we don't foresee any big problem, and all the counties are working together in communication. Intel through the state police infusion centers also are involved, but nothing that we're really concerned with at the moment.
Well, and you would know, and of course, being there and just being on patrol, I think Election Day will be just fine. And I think a lot of this is just to sort of soften the ground for something. I'm not sure, but Scott, duly appreciate everything, and we'll talk again very soon as we get further in towards 2021, because I know that a lot of what we were just talking about here in the General Assembly, we might be able to undo with a governor's race and some General Assembly seats. So hopefully we'll see how that comes. I know you're not going to weigh in politically per se, but when it comes down to supporting law enforcement, I think we need to look at candidates and what it is they're saying and want to do when it comes to supporting law enforcement. And if there needs to be reforms, reforming it legislatively, not just telling law enforcement officers to stop enforcing the law.
Absolutely. We need leaders that are going to abide by our Constitution first and foremost, and we're a country of laws, and we need someone that is strongly for law enforcement. It's public safety is the first responsibility of government, and that starts with everywhere from our president and the military to our local police and state and federal agencies that keep us safe. That's government's first job.
Well, I appreciate everything you do there in Culpeper County and across the Commonwealth. Your leadership of the sheriff's associations across the Commonwealth have been great leaders in making sure that the citizens are connected to their law enforcement as you are constitutional officers. And I appreciate your visit this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you having me again.
Filmmaker and doctor Andy Wakefield. Coming up next, his film is called 1986, The Act, on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.